Hey there, this is Natalie, and yes, you read that right. Today I'm going to talk about the misogyny in the rising of the shield hero, but stick with me. This isn't some kind of surprising new anti-shield hero direction or anything. I just have points. See, while I've been getting ready to cover season 3 of Shield Hero on my channel, I've been, for whatever reason, revisiting some of those precious blog posts and videos from 2019 about the so-called problematic elements in the beginning of the series. Now, having spent quite a lot of time thinking about Shield Hero lately and discussing it with other people over on X, I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about the actual story and characters in videos over the rest of the current season. But I feel like first, it's kind of worth addressing the previous controversies around it, so that what I think about it has been said, and we can move forward into the next arcs in the anime without this coming up again. The people who hated Shield Hero for their own interpretations of it probably won't be watching season 3 anyway, but I didn't have a channel back in season 1, and during season 2 I kinda had to start that long hiatus for personal reasons, so I never got around to making a more commentary type video on the reactions to the series, rather than just character and lore videos. But anyway, when it comes to the misogyny and the shield hero, my conclusion is this. Yes, misogyny is a feature in the story of the rising of the shield hero, and is actually a central theme of the first few episodes, the part that covers the first volume of the light novels. This goes up to the part where Raphtalia commits to staying by Naofumi's side after the duel that the spear hero Motoyasu challenged him to free her. This is also when Naofumi notices that Raphtalia has physically grown up. But the way that ideas around misogyny are incorporated into the plot of this early part of Naofumi's character arc are actually completely intentional as part of his character arc, and not glorified or painted as a reasonable state that the character isn't supposed to develop out of. They're also not a byproduct of the work itself being misogynist, or aimed at incels, or whatever other stuff people railed against it for. So what I'm saying is, the shield hero himself is, during this part of the story, misogynistic, but Shield Hero the series is not. And I'm going to explain what I think about all of this in more detail in just a minute. But before I get into that, really quickly, I just want to let you know that I now have a second channel, which I'll be using to talk about Western media and pop culture type stuff that wouldn't really fit in on this anime channel. The first video went up yesterday and is a review and discussion of the South Park special, Joining the Pandaverse. And if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please check it out. There is a link in the description, and I'd also really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel if you want to see some extra content from me. Getting a new channel started up is really an uphill battle on YouTube, so I really need the love. Okay, so now back to Shield Hero. Naofumi starts out as someone who doesn't seem to have any particularly unusual views about women for a 20-year-old guy. He seems like he's probably inexperienced with women, but we get the impression he's straight and likes the idea of meeting a girl in this new world, which is a pretty common thought for an isekai protagonist to have. He notices Myne and thinks she's attractive, and when she volunteers to join his party, he's grateful that she saved him from having to struggle with no allies, and he's hopeful about things. He doesn't exhibit any kind of sexist views like that having a woman as his only teammate will be a hindrance. He hopes she might be into him at some point, but he's not actively trying anything with her. Basically, it doesn't look like he hates women or sees them as inferior or inherently untrustworthy, or that he feels entitled to anything from Myne other than her acting like a normal ally and party member at the very start of the story. But then, Myne falsely accuses him of attempted, I guess I have to say some stupid thing like grape or R-word here, because we can't talk like grown-ups on this platform anymore. And this is the point where Naofumi does start to exhibit some misogynist thoughts, and I'll come to that in a minute. But first I want to address the complaints around this plot point in general. Many people have called this tone deaf in light of real-world issues, with the perception that women don't always come forward through fears of not being believed about genuine claims of those kind of crimes being committed against them. Now, this is at the very start of a series that began writing in 2012, so couldn't really be expected to take the Me Too movement into account when deciding whether this plot was actually going to tie into any real-world hot topics. But even if we ignore that, if you think about what's actually happening here, it doesn't really match with those real-world concerns anyway. We have Myne, who is in a position of power, as a princess in a country with a matrilineal monarchy, framing Naofumi for what is viewed as a major crime in this setting. In a lot of medieval settings, both fictional and historical, the sad reality was the R word wasn't even necessarily a crime, and in cases involving ordinary people, literally nobody cared, as we often see in stuff like Game of Thrones. But here, Myne knows exactly what the outcome will be if she accuses someone of this. And so what we're really seeing is a very efficient abuse of power, in a setting where it makes sense for the antagonist to do it this way. I just don't think it's problematic to portray an abuse of power where the victim is a man and the instigator is a woman. I mean, the fact it's the other way around in the real world cases these people care about when they're citing the Me Too movement doesn't mean that that's the only way around it can be, or should be written in stories. Is it problematic when Dolores Umbridge uses her position of authority to basically torture Harry Potter? Or does an abuse of power where a man is the victim only become problematic when crimes of a sex nature are involved? I've seen some people argue that, well, it paints false R-word accusations as the worst thing that someone could do to Naofumi, as if a woman lying about that is the worst thing that could happen to a man. And that's just incel thinking. But if you consider the consequences Myne knows there will be for Naofumi, well, it actually is about the worst thing someone can do to him that would also fit with this being at the early point in the story. That is, where he doesn't have anyone he cares about in this world yet that she could target, and nobody knows enough about him to know of any specific weaknesses he may have. She knows, due to her position, that nobody will demand any proof from her, and due to the fact the country already demonises the shield hero for religious reasons that are revealed later on, they'd be ready to believe anything bad about him. Yes, there are certainly equivalent situations in the real world, where in some social climates a woman could conceivably ruin a man's life by doing this and not be challenged. But it's not really the norm in reality that a woman with bad intentions would have the same level of certainty about the consequences of the lies as Myne does here. It's a situation that's very dependent on the setting and bears little resemblance to normal life, which is one of the reasons it's so unsettling to Naofumi, who has just arrived from modern Japan. Nobody questions any of it, and he has no legal options to defend himself. If you put aside the knee-jerk outrage about the fact it involves a woman lying about a crime we'd rather think nobody ever lied about, and instead just looked at it objectively as a plot point, it's an outsider being framed for a crime that they didn't commit, by someone who knows they will be believed, and this outsider being ostracised and bullied as a result. That's not a particularly weird thing to have happen in a story. Cases of being framed actually happen later to other characters, even in this story, and Naofumi always tends to want to step in and help someone when he thinks something unfair like this is happening to them as a result of his own experiences. His reputation is ruined, he's left with no money, support, or means of doing the thing he was summoned without his consent to do. So yes, to knowingly cause that is pretty much the worst thing someone could have done to him after his arrival. She does rob him as well, for good measure. I mean, sure, she could have just murdered him, that would have been technically worse, but because this isn't Re:Zero, the author had to consider putting in reasons why the main character couldn't be killed in episode 1. In fact, if it wasn't for those reasons, he would have been executed because of her accusation anyway, so she would have been indirectly murdering him by lying. And some say, well, it's only the worst thing she can do because the author made it that way. They could have done something else that wouldn't have been so problematic. And yes, it's true of literally every piece of fiction ever written that the author could have just made something different happen. But if it had been done differently, in a way that would have appeased these sorts of people, so in a way that didn't make a woman's lies the cause of Naofumi's initial hardships, then the whole character arc I'll be talking about in just a minute wouldn't have been justified, and we'd have a completely different protagonist. So given this was the story the author wanted to write, this plot point actually serves the story very well. Now, they say too that having Myne make the false R-word accusation is just a lazy way to make the audience hate her, and that it relies on painting her as evil for doing something we tend to think of as being something only a woman can do. So it's misogynist. Her being evil and her being female are tied. But it's not the only evil act she's given to establish her as an antagonist by far. And we're shown that she has this particular sociopathic personality type that her family are well aware of, which is why she's not next in line for the throne. This is shown in a lot more detail in the novels, for instance in a chapter from the Spear Hero's perspective where it's hinted to the audience that she sells his new female party members that she doesn't like into slavery, and in a chapter from her sister Malty's perspective where she talks about Myne's disturbing, insane tantrums when she can't win at board games. But we see plenty of examples in the anime too, such as her trying to murder her sister. This ties into something I'll come back to when I get into how Naofumi views women, but the point is not that Myne in any way represents women in the setting, or even a type of evil woman that gets to do what she wants to do just because it's a matriarchy. The Queen knows very well about the problems with Myne's personality, and it's only because she's away, and both the King and the Spear Hero trust Myne, that she can run amok. The King is simply blinded by the fact she's his daughter and he loves her, which is not a particularly strange trope, plus the fact he hates the shield hero anyway for his own reasons. And Motoyasu, the Spear Hero, is blinded by his bizarre sense of loyalty, which is part of this whole other theme going on with the other heroes, representing the bad side of heroic ideals like loyalty, heroism and justice. And for a bigger breakdown on what I think about that, you can check out my videos about the heroes. Myne is contrasted with Malty, who is a kind person, and it's not exactly subtle with their red and blue colour schemes, and their true names, Malty and Malty, which make it obvious that they're supposed to be viewed as sisters who are very different, just as when the same thing's done in ReZero with Rem and Ram. She's also contrasted with the Queen, who's a competent stateswoman and takes her responsibilities seriously. The matrilineal nature of the country is not painted as the cause of Naofumi's problems. Just one very toxic woman is. Is it misogynistic to have a female antagonist, or a female antagonist who abuses their power, or a female antagonist who uses social rather than physical means to oppose the protagonist? I'd say it would be pretty sexist if memorable characters like that were only allowed to be men, actually. But then we come to Naofumi's views about women after this has happened to him. In the light novels, this is expressed a lot more clearly by Naofumi's dark thoughts when he first gets the chance to buy Raftalia. He thinks about how she's female, and that alone is enough to remind him of Myne, which makes him kind of like the idea of having her as his slave, and he even wonders if he might feel some satisfaction if Raftalia died. Of course, this is the cute and harmless sick child version of Raftalia, who we as an audience feel sorry for, and who he will come to love, and so to see him thinking about her in this way, literally just because she's female, is quite shocking, but that's the intention. To see Naofumi thinking so cruelly about someone he would normally care about helping, just because she's the same gender as Myne, is supposed to make us see how badly Myne has messed him up. That he hates all women right now, even those with no power at all. And that's not a state we want him to be in for the rest of the story. Even in Redo of Healer, Kaoru doesn't hate random women who had nothing to do with what happened to him. But here, Naofumi does, and that overt misogyny is part of his story, but it's not glorified. We're not supposed to side with him in this moment. We're supposed to realise how bad the damage to his psyche is and hope that he'll soon learn to treat people as individuals and judge whether he likes or trusts them based on that, rather than whether one basic trait is shared with Myne. And then through getting to know Raphtalia and her proving she isn't going to leave or betray him, he comes to start seeing the gender of a person as less important when it comes to whether or not they might be a good person. He still has massive trust issues, which is why Raphtalia opts to get the slave crest reinstated even though he tells her it isn't necessary. Because with that, she can't lie, and she knows it'll help him to trust her, and that he still needs that right now. His hatred then changes towards other things that he associates with Myne. For instance, being fine with Malty at first, but wanting nothing to do with her when he finds out she's a princess. But over time, as Malty acts with integrity, and he then meets the Queen, he begins to truly direct his anger towards those who have actually given him a reason to hate them specifically, rather than having those prejudices based on them having something in common with Myne. Now, some people say that even taking all of this into account, it's still misogynist as a story, because to get Naofumi out of this mindset, Raphtalia, Malty and others have to prove they're one of the good ones, nice women that will do what he wants. But that's actually nonsense. There are plenty of fairly shady women with big character flaws, even an evil female dragon that Naofumi will be willing to listen to and work with as the story goes on. It's not all lovable, supportive waifus like Raphtalia for the rest of the story, I promise. While Naofumi does lose his irrational hatred of women fairly early in the story, he does still have some issues when it comes to intimacy and romance as a result of what happened with Myne, and this goes on for quite a lot longer. This is something I talked about in my video about what will happen between Naofumi and Raphtalia, so I won't go into all of it again here, but I don't think we can really say that a man being put off relationships and sex with women for a while by a bad experience is unrealistic or misogynistic. He doesn't hate women anymore, he just feels disgusted by the idea of intimacy, and that's something else for him to get over as part of his long-term character development. The thing is, I think we've probably all known someone, male or female, who went through a phase of hating men or women after a bad experience. I've definitely known girls who, after being cheated on or in a bad relationship, have decided they hated men for a little while afterwards. But they get over it as soon as they eventually realise that their brother or their dad or some guy they know from work is a good person, and not every man is looking to hurt them. This is basically what Naofumi goes through in the story. It's not hard to understand someone having that reaction, or to conceive why the author might have thought it was a good thing to put in the story. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon, and to those of you who have helped me out with donations via Ko-fi. I am really grateful and I love you all. Thank you too to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Please check out the second channel as I mentioned earlier, links are in the description. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you again very soon.